Good. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Right, good morning. It's still, no, afternoon. Time zone's weird. Okay, so I'm actually not just going to cover a bit of PHP 5.4. I'm going to cover just about everything that's changed. So this is a really, really high level but quick talk, and you'll see what I mean. So let's get into this. So I am Davey Shafik. I'm an engineer at Engineer for the Orchestra Platform as a Service. It's really cool. I've written 3 separate books. If anyone's Zen certified, you may have read the first one. This is my newest one. I have 2 copies that I'm giving away today and 2 tomorrow. So there'll be a bit more on that at the end, so that kind of means you have to stay. I am a long-term contributor to PHAR. I was one of the initial contributors to Zen Framework. Anyone use Zen Framework? That's nice. If you've done any of the web services stuff in Zen Framework, that's kind of mine and Matthew's work, so that's pretty cool. I also work on Frappy. Anyone use Frappy for web services? Check it out, it's really cool. It's sort of a REST web services framework. I'm at dshafik on Twitter. Follow me if you care about my insane ramblings. I do cover quite a bit of PHP, but mostly not. Please buy my books. That's what let me be here. You know. There is one more thing, and this is quite important. I am hard of hearing. So if you have a question, they've got a mic. If I can't hear you, I'll just walk over, but please speak up, and that way everyone can hear you as well. So, and everybody does forget this every time, because it's kind of this tiny whisper, and it's like, no, not get it. One more thing, actually, I'm British, living in America, my accent's changed, so just ignore it. So one more thing I like to tell about is about my slides. I actually do this thing where nobody likes to read what I'm saying, so I've got a slide like this, and then another one behind it that tells, like, this is what you'll take home. So this is information for you to take home. I'll just skip past these, so just ignore those slides, but they're in the deck, and hopefully people will like them. So that's it. Let's get into the content. So the very small stuff, and I'm actually supposed to be able to see both sides of this. It's very awkward. But I'm supposed to be able to read that other slide you don't see. Let's see if I can just get that. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so very small stuff. There's been a change, or not a change, but an addition to sessions. I'm sure most everybody is using sessions. We've added a session handler interface. If anyone's done custom sessions using session set save handler, you used to have to pass in a whole bunch of callbacks. There's now a class that you can just extend, or an interface you can extend, session handler interface, and you just implement the methods and pass in one object, and it automatically registers all of the different callbacks. There's now the PHP binary constant, which tells you where PHP binary is located. So very small stuff. As Erasmus mentioned, there's now a notice on array to string conversions, and he pointed out it's quite important that you actually take notice of those. It is almost definitely a bug if you see that. Much better memory usage and performance. If you saw a performance increase in 5.3, it's even better in 5.4. And in my own testing, the difference between 5.3 and 5.4 is greater than between 5.2 and 5.3. And 5.3 was quite a jump. So that's pretty cool. So I do want to go into a little bit more on the session handler interface, because I think it's kind of cool. It's really simple, standard interface. These are the 5 callbacks, 6 callbacks that you would pass in before. Implement the interface and just pass in, instead of the individual functions, implement the interface and pass it straight in one object. There is a default class session handler that automatically does the current behavior, which you can extend. So it's quite nice. So if you just want to change the serialization, you can actually do that by extending session handler, change it to JSON, say, instead of PHP serialization. You lose a lot of features in that, but it's doable. So language changes. There's been quite a few. Every single one of them is backwards compatible, which is quite cool. Short echo tags. The question mark equals is now always valid, which is really useful for templates. If you've done views in sort of Zen Framework or anything like that, you've probably come across this. So that's pretty cool. The binary numbers, 0b instead of 0x, or 0 for octal. I can't think of a single use for this, but it's there. Okay. The new array syntax, it saves you 5 characters, but it's still handy. And I actually quite like it in slides. So that's my primary use for it. I can actually fit more on. So yeah, just the square brackets instead of the array. Array dereferencing. This is actually quite a cool one. It's tricky. This is where you can call a function and immediately access the elements in the array that are returned. You can only do it once you've lost the array at the end of it. You really have to know what you're getting back. And quite honestly, if you do know that, you probably should have written a different function that returns actually what you want. So doable, I would skip it. Dynamic method calls. So there's been a few changes here. It's all along you've been able to do $var equals function name and then do $var 2 parentheses, right? That's pretty easy stuff. But you never could do static methods on classes. And you could do $object, arrow, curly braces, method name. So now you can actually do static methods as well. So that's pretty cool. The second one here is this throwaway class, instantiate and immediately access a method. Again, you lose your class like you do with the array dereferencing, so it's kind of useless. And as Rasmus said, static is almost always the answer. Not that static is necessarily a good thing, but it's definitely better than this, I think. And you can actually combine sort of this syntax, where you've got a variable method that you're calling on a instantiated object that you're going to throw away. Please don't write code like this. Nobody's going to want to read it. In addition to these, there's actually been a lot of improvements to closures and callbacks. And we have had callbacks in PHP forever. And we've had 3 different syntaxes, which is simply a function as a string, and then 2 different arrays types. One where you have the object as the first key, and one where you have the method. And you're actually passing an object in, and the other one where you have the class name and a static method. And those you can always use in call user func or call user func array. We've actually now turned those into proper callbacks, just like closures. So you can do an array and then do the brackets. Well, assign it to something first and then do variable brackets. So that's pretty cool. We've now got a callable type hint, which is really useful. You can actually pass in just about anything as long as it's a valid call. If it is a valid callback, you can pass in anything. But that means you can pass in strings, arrays, closures, or a class with an invoke magic method. Has anyone not seen the invoke method yet? Good, this is great. The other big thing that's in there is this last one here, the $this inside of closures. You can actually, in my opinion, break the entire object model with this new feature. But I have one use case for it, which I'll mention. So let's take a look at the callable type hint. It's really just the same as arrays or class names right there, callable. And every single one of these, whether it's a closure, a single string function name, or the 2 array types, are now valid to go into a function with that signature, as well as a class with an invoke on it. And this is the one I think is going to catch people, because it's not as obvious, I think, as these. Lithium does a lot with invoke classes, lots of magic there. So be careful with this one, I think. And as I say, any single one of these is pretty cool for work. So this enclosures, this is the complicated one, and I've got quite a bit of slides on this later. So these are actually, we have late static binding in PHP 5.3. So self and parent and double underscore class, those all late static binding. This is early binding. It's based on the time where you define the function. So it's based on the object in which you create the callback, always, unless you change it. It's great, right? So in PHP 5.3, if we do this type of syntax, we get a null back. In 5.4, we actually get the class that's called where it's defined, not the one where we call it. So we have class bar, we create a new foo, get the closure. This is going to be foo, not bar. So it's not where it's called, it's where it's defined. It's early binding. Okay, so the array callbacks, as I mentioned, before you could do string name into a variable, throw the parentheses after it and be able to call it. You can now do the same thing with both static calls with an array and instance methods. So kind of cool. Again, a lot of these are obfuscating your code. So use them sparingly. I think this is better, though, than call user func array because there's an extra function call there. Just a little bit of overhead that I don't know. Do you know? Does it? Any more overhead? Yeah. So rebinding this, or how to break the object model. I'm not sure if I like this feature, but I do have a really good use case for it. So there's two ways that you can rebind this. You can actually change the object that this refers to, and you can change the scope within which you're accessing this. And that second one is the tricky one. So very importantly, when you're rebinding, it doesn't change the original closure. Should we say? It doesn't change the original closure, it returns a copy with the rebound this. This can be any object. So if you have access to it, you can assign it. And as I said, this and the scope are separate. So you can actually rebind this in a way that it's like you're accessing one class from another, and you have the same, I just switched. You have the same level of access as you would being outside of the object, so you don't have access to private methods, properties, stuff like that. So let's look at that a little bit and see what the hell this does for us. So in this case, we're just class foo, just getting a closure. Doesn't really do much. Apologies. Then we have class bar, which is implementing our world function. We have hello being called up there. So what we're doing here is we're going to instantiate foo, get back our foo object, grab our closure, which currently has $this is the instance of foo. Then we're going to go grab bar, an instance of bar, and we're going to rebind. And we're going to rebind it to bar. And what this means is that up here, where we're doing this world, now that we've changed what this means, we're now looking at this object. This syntax, or this code actually will run, whereas before it never would have, because there's no world function inside of foo. Again, if you're doing this, you've confused somebody, because I know I just confused some of you, right? So this is there's two syntaxes here. There's bind to, which is on the closure instance, and then there's closure static bind. This takes two arguments. The first one is the object to bind to. The second one is the scope. Default is if you only pass one in, it uses the scope of that one as well. So normally, actually this disproves what I just said. Normally you wouldn't be able to access bar world because it's private from foo. So we have this private function here. You wouldn't normally be able to access it. So even though you've changed this, you haven't changed the scope away from foo. So you can't access the methods you think you can. And that's where this lovely error comes from. And this is exactly the same as if you instantiate an object inside of foo and try to access bar. It's the exact same error. Same problem with context. So instead of doing this line where we're binding to the object, we actually have to pass it in twice. And now we're changing the context so that when you are in that closure, not only is this pointing to bar, but you actually have the context of bar and all of the access that you would have as if you were in bar. I hate using metasyntactic variables for slides. So this is the only change here, is literally this addition here, passing in that extra variable, and that changes your scope. The one sort of implementation that I can see for this is actually unit testing, where you have to kind of do mock objects and move things around, and maybe access private stuff you shouldn't be able to just to test them. I don't see a genuine implementation where this is useful. As Rasmus said, a lot of framework guys are probably going to have a field day and confuse a lot of people. Before I move on, is there any questions on that? Because that's a really complicated sort of bit of code.
Yeah, you've got bar and bar, so how do I explain this? Does it actually completely move? So foo doesn't actually become anything to do with new closure anymore? So you've got the object new closure?
Yeah. So yeah, the scope and this. So what's interesting is that you can change the $this to something else and be accessing it as if you were not inside of that class. So that's kind of nice in terms of encapsulation. The very awkward thing is you can keep this the same, but change the scope to be another class, so that you're actually losing access to private properties and methods. And again, could be kind of nice in terms of encapsulation, but very confusing. So let's move on to probably the biggest feature that everyone's been thinking about in 5.4 that I wished had been in 5.3. It's traits, which is horizontal reuse. And as Rasmus said, compiler level copy and paste. Don't overthink this. It literally is the same, almost, as you copying and pasting. The benefit is that you have it dry. You're reusing code all over your project and modify it once. It's the same sort of goal of object-oriented code, where you're trying to not repeat yourself. I mean, it's a good goal. So there's 4 new keywords that come with traits. Obviously, the trait keyword itself. There is use, as, and instead of. We'll get to those in a little bit. You can use multiple traits within a single class. So that's really handy. You can actually compose your classes out of multiple smaller chunks. And you can also not just define methods, but abstract methods. So you can actually say in the trait that you've got to implement this in the object that you're using the trait, or in somewhere down the line, just like standard abstract method. So it's literally copy and pasted. And you can also define properties, which is quite handy. Especially if you're doing like singleton, you might want to pull in a property that holds the actual singleton as part of your class. Let's take a look at traits. Has anyone looked at traits yet? Okay, so fair number of you. That's good. So traits look a lot like classes. Just substitute trait for class, or class for trait. Define your method, and it's there. The difference is, just like interfaces or abstract classes, you cannot instantiate them on their own. They don't do anything. They're just parts of your PHP file. And then this here, this new keyword, use. This is where you pull in traits, and with the comma you can have multiple traits. It's really simple. There's nothing complicated about this. So that's cool. Where it does get a little tricky is when you're looking at inheritance and scope. If you have a class that implements something, or has a method, and then you extend it, and then in the extended class you bring in a trait that will override the parent class's method, what happens? Kind of a little ambiguous. But it's really simple. It overrides. It's just the same as if it was really in the class. I mean, it really is copy and paste. So we've got our 2 traits again. We're pulling in 2 different methods. Now, in this one, we've got a hello world that's in the class that you're pulling the trait into. It's then considered that the trait is kind of the parent, which is overridden automatically. So I think it behaves mostly how you would expect. If there's something in the parent, you're pulling the trait into the child, it overrides the parent. If you're pulling the trait in and defining a method in that same class, it overrides the trait. So I think it is quite obvious and does exactly what you would expect. So a little bit more on precedence. This is kind of just what I went through. When you're talking about parent, is that not really static, but the keyword parent to access the parents of methods. In the trait itself, parent is unknown, but it's not implemented anywhere. And I would say that that was a bad trait because you don't know where it's going to be used. Sort of by definition of horizontal reuse, you don't know if there even is a parent. But you certainly can use it. So if you've got a trait that uses, say, world, that extends, if you had implemented this trait up in say, it wouldn't make sense. It doesn't work. But when you extend and pull it in, it's exactly what you would expect. Parent is the parent of the class it's implemented in or used in. When you extend again, it's exactly the same. So within the extended class or within the trait, parent is still exactly what it would normally be. as if it was really there. And again, it's as if it was really there. If you're unsure, copy and paste the code and see what it does. Method visibility. This one's actually quite cool. You can define within a trait something as private or protected or public, and you can actually change that when you implement or use the trait. Again, if somebody's made something protected and you're making it public, there's probably, you need a good reason, right? But you can do it. And it is really nice to actually make things private, move it away from public use. I'm not going to use this, or you shouldn't be using it within my context. And that's done by using this new syntax, which is along the lines of the use, throw in the curly braces, and in here is where you can do all of your conflict resolution and your visibility stuff. So what we're doing here, we have a private method in our trait, and we're going to make it public. Anyone can use it. Might be a good reason for that. Maybe this uses pairing, and unless you explicitly make it public, nobody can call it because you don't have a pairing. So that's one use for that. When you do have conflicts, you can also use aliasing, and this is how we get around the conflict issue of two traits having two methods that are the same. And that's really simple. Just use the as keyword. So I think our final keyword. So you can pull in any trait, and then these are methods. So hello is a method of that trait, and world is a method of that trait. And you can also change the visibility at the same time. So you don't have to, but you can. So that's how you get around conflict resolution. There's no magic in the conflict resolution. You do it or it breaks. Okay. So this is actually what happens when it breaks. If you do not resolve the conflicts, you get a fatal error. It's not a warning. It's not a notice. It is fatal. And I think quite rightly so. If you put the same method in a class twice, you get an error. So again, compiler-assisted copy and paste. So it's actually possible to, in the case of where you've got two, how do you know which one you're talking about? So we have aliasing, which is what we saw before, where you can just rename any method, and if they're unique, you don't need to qualify them. In the case of conflicting methods, you just qualify them with the trait name. Same with classes, double colon, and it works. It's the exact same syntax. Now, interestingly, we have this is the last keyword, instead of. That allows you to explicitly state, I want this one instead of that one. It's quite obvious in the name. And what that does is, this one never even comes in from the trait, unless you explicitly pull it in. So what we're doing, I'm going to explain a little bit more. This is one trait with the mother function. This is actually the trait name, not the method name. So it will pull in everything but the mother method from this trait, and that one isn't there unless you explicitly then bring it in. One more thing about traits is trait detection is something using a trait. If you have, and very stupidly, if you have a singleton class that you extend for all your singletons, you can do an instance of. You can't do that in a trait, with a trait. So what we've got is class uses, and class uses actually returns an array. Both the keys and the values are the names of the traits that are used by that class. So you can actually look at the arrays or the keys, which is nice. And we can use array dereferencing to check very easily if it's there, and that's one use case for array dereferencing. So right here, class uses, throw the object in, that's going to return an array with hello world as the key value pair, and here's the dereference right here. It would be nice if there was an extra argument here and just return a boolean, so I may submit a patch on that. But this is actually the most compact syntax to check if a trait is being used right now. So, built-in CLI server. It's actually pretty cool, and it actually does just a little bit more than for unit tests. Don't use it for anything more than unit tests, but it does a little bit more. The CLI server is instantiated by using the -S flag, and that's all you have to do, PHP, capital S, and you've suddenly got a web server. And its document root is the current working directory. So if you go to your browser, and I think it's -S host port, you can bind it to localhost and whatever port. So if you then go in your browser to that host and port, / and a file name in your current working directory, it will run that straight from that directory. It defaults to index.php, so fairly common Apache configuration, or Nginx, so you don't need anything to hit the /, just / will hit index.php. It will serve static assets, so if you've got images, CSS, JavaScript, it will load those up, no problem. And it allows rewriting, like mod rewrite, but a little bit simpler, and we'll get into that, how that works. So I actually recorded a demo on this, but I'm not going to actually play it. So I'm going to actually do it. So I have, I have a very simple directory with an index, an info.php that contains PHP info, cool, and also this sappy PHP file. We'll get to the other one a little bit more later. So if I want to serve this code up, all I have to do is php-s -s localhost 8080. Okay, so we get this very simple, starts up the server, tells you your document root, so you know if you want to kill the server, Control-C, really simple. And if I pull up a browser, it's just dumping the _server array. So very simple, just works. If we look at a little bit more, look at info.php, if I can type. Here is PHP info, and it will run any PHP code. There's no sort of special magic going on. If we look a little bit down here, big section that's missing is the Apache section. But all your extensions are loaded. Obviously the CLI extension, so if you do have a CLI config, so php-cli.ini, it will use that, not your typical web server config. So one little gotcha there. That does mean it's really easy to do php-m to see what modules you've got, stuff like that. So that just works. One final thing is Sappy, php_Sappy is a constant. CLI server is what it's set to, not Apache 2 or PHP FPM. This allows you to write code, say in your index.php, that will route for the CLI server for testing purposes, instead of invoking maybe your regular bootstrap immediately. So this is a little bit handy to know. So that's the very basic functionality, serves files from the local disk. So as I said, you can do mod rewrite capabilities. Really, it's more like your MVC router. What you can do is the last argument for -s is actually a file name, and every single request will go through the file that you send, and it comes in as request URI. This is the same variable that every single MVC stack I've ever seen uses. I'm pretty sure that I haven't tried. You can use the Zen framework or Lithium routers straight out of the box, regular bootstrap, just pointed to index.php as your router like you normally would. Like you normally do rewrite rule, everything goes to index.php. So use your index.php as that last argument for -s, and it will pretty much work. So as I said, if you want to do special code just for this specific environment, maybe you want to set up your Zen framework environment, set it to development, great idea, because you shouldn't be using it in anything else, and you don't necessarily have like the set end that you have in Apache. That's a great place to do it. So this is an example router. Something that's really quite inobvious is that if the file, now this is not a function call, this is directly in the file, the main part of the file. If it returns false, then it kicks back to the file system and will actually load the file off the file system. So if it's a static image, something like that, you don't want PHP to be passing that. Yeah. So just return false, and it will automatically pull it off the file system. Otherwise, you can route it however you want. So that is typically, if you've ever set up Zen framework or anything like that, you'll do sort of if the file exists or if it ends in JS, CS, S, something like that, you won't route it through index.php. You don't have that luxury here. You do have to handle it yourself, but it's really simple with the return false. So another live demo. Really don't like full screen. We'll kill that, and we'll do it again. Bounce it up PHP. So if you notice, all I did was pass through one more argument, which is my router file, which is the same file that I just had on the slide. And if I pull that up, you'll see right at the beginning, it actually says this is the requested resource. And if we look at the server array, we should see right. Anyone see it?
Left, fifth down.
Okay, so request URI right up there. That's where it comes in. So it's really simple, and it pretty much just works. So it's a cool feature. As Rasmus said, do not use it in production. But for development, I actually think it's really quite cool. I don't know how many people have set up XAMPP. Yeah, this is so much simpler and easier, and it's cross-platform. So that's just about it. And I think we have sort of 15 minutes left for questions. So.
Could you run multiple instances of this?
Yes, you could. Just open up another terminal tab. Obviously, bind to a separate port is the only thing. So I guess you could proxy it or something, but please don't.
Hi, I noticed your interest and obviously contribution to Zen framework. So I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on how PHP 5.4 has with Zen 1.10, 1.11.10, Zen 2, whether they're compatible, etc.
Yeah, Zen ZF1 absolutely is compatible. The only thing that you might see is those notices array string conversion, but again, bug, so it's not a problem. ZF2, I know Matthew Werofini's project lead, has had discussions about actually using 5.4 because the trait stuff is really quite cool, and you can do some nice framework level stuff with that and the other features. So there's been discussion, but I don't know what the end result of that is. I would imagine not, just because current one is 5.1, I think, was the original compatibility level. So I would be surprised if they went 5.4. I do know that Lithium has pretty much stated they will be willing to break backwards compatibility for the $this syntax, because currently they do some sort of juggling to break the object model themselves. That would be a lot easier if they had access to this. I do think that 5.4, if you are writing a new application, you should be targeting 5.4. Despite all of the disclaimers of please don't do this, you can actually write really good, efficient, nice code with the new features. And more importantly, it's faster. Right? That's what we all want. So, anything else?
Do you see the new use of...
Yes, yeah, I can't hear. Sorry.
No problem. Do you see the new this enclosures being especially useful for things such as curl asynchronous or libevent to...
I don't think, not especially. I mean, yes, it's useful, but I don't... Sorry, did everyone hear that? The question was, do you find this useful, or is it good for libevent, stuff like that? I don't think it's any more useful explicitly for that. I think it's useful for everything. I kind of wish it had been in 5.3, and I know that it wasn't because there were some ambiguities around it. So, no, I don't think especially for that, but yes, it's useful. Anybody else?
In terms of upgrading to
I ran into one segfault, but I think that's my code. Quite frankly, this is for me the most test passing-y release ever. There are more tests passing in this release than any other one I've tested. This RC8, the last one that just came out, is the first time I've had 0 failed tests, usually 3 or 4 at least. So in terms of stability, I do think 5.4 is absolutely rock solid, and there really isn't any major gotchas. Obviously, you can't. There's no way to kind of work around the 5.4 stuff in 5.3. So if you're going to go 5.4, you kind of have to go all in. So I think it's worth it. I really do. So this is for me probably the most exciting PHP release since 5. So this guy's going.
Can you define a property of this rate? Presumably not.
You can define a property. You can. And you can use it just as if it were in the class. And the same private, public, protected stuff applies. So absolutely you can. Limited use, I think, because it's not like inheriting a property where you've got functionality to use it and stuff. So it's useful. I like it. Do it. No problems with it.
So in principle, then, is the only difference between a trait and a mix-in just the conflict resolution?
Yes, I don't have much experience with mix-ins, but my understanding is there's a lot more magic with the conflict resolution, and it can be kind of ambiguous how it works. One of the major problems we try to solve is that ambiguity. You want to know what your code is doing, and you especially don't want it to change based on other factors. So the explicit ambiguity resolution is a big feature over mixins, I think. So, anything else?
In terms of performance, how much faster is 5.4 than 5.3?
Did you do some benchmarks?
I didn't.
Somebody was saying like 20%.
How much?
20%, but that's synthetic benchmarks. So even if it's 1%, I think it's worthwhile in some applications. It's really going to vary. But as I say, in terms of sort of comparing the two, which is I think probably a better metric, the 5.4 increase over 5.3 is greater than 5.3 over 5.2. So that's what I would go by.
How it's going to work with the Drupal?
With Drupal?
Yeah.
In terms of like the array string stuff?
Yeah.
They need to fix their stuff. It's broken. It's their test suite, to be clear. It's their test suite that's broken. Not necessarily, not just that. You know, it's not. They need to fix their stuff. There's really no other way about it. It is a bug.
Release a new version of Drupal 4.
Yes. Not necessarily, because that code is broken in 5.3. To be clear, it's not something new. We're just now throwing a notice to tell you that it's broken. So I mean, it's been broken all the way back to whenever that array stuff came in. So I do think they have to fix it.
Just to add one thing to it, I did a test with Drupal and the simple Drupal installation worked on 5.4 after doing a very small change to one of these lines with this array conversion, which was wrong. I had to do one change to get Drupal running on 5.4, even on the embedded web server. So that's really fine.
And that obviously is going to fix a bug in 5.3, 5.2. So absolutely, should just fix it. Anything else? Oh, wow, there's a lot of questions.
Hi. Early on, you mentioned the callable type hint.
Yes.
Is that just a straightforward type checking, or is it doing some magic that makes callbacks easier to call?
No, it is just a straightforward, just like array is it callable? It's actually identical to doing is underscore callable on something.
Right. Okay.
So it has the same semantics and stuff about it. So that's really all it's doing.
Okay.
So it does mean, because as Rasmus said, we always want to make sure that you're not going to accidentally call it as a callable if it's not, unlike other type hinting. So that's kind of what it's for. You do want it to error on the person throwing it in, not in your code because you called it as a callable, but it's not. Anything else?
Two questions.
I'll allow it.
You mentioned the session set error.
Yes.
And there's now the interface
still the old way. Submit a patch.
And the other one is, is complete aside, is there going to be a 5.4 certification? Do you have any?
That's a good question. I would hope so. I would hope so. I am not 5.3 certified, despite writing the 5 cert book. But yes, I would imagine so, but I have no clue what's going on at Zen. So I would absolutely imagine so. There was enough language level changes that it's beneficial. So, anything else?
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. That was really
Thank you.